So I wanted to talk about this as something that might be more than a passing trend or just a kind of reactionary retreat, but something that seems to me to have some life in it at a pretty deep level, and to offer some clues that might be helpful, especially for those who are a bit disoriented by this turn, as to why this might be part of what's emerging, what's called for by the times in which we find ourselves. So I don't want to try and talk about the inner content of faith, because that would be a different talk, and you'd probably need a different speaker, because when it comes to great mystery, I find that I don't have many words and I don't need many words. And faith is almost by definition that which doesn't make sense. So there's something slightly absurd about me offering reasons why I think this turn belongs to the times we're in. And I certainly don't want to explain away the experiences of faith that some of the people who I've mentioned have had in these years. But I think it might be possible to outline some reasons why the times were ripe for this strange quickening. The first one goes back to actually what I was meant to be interviewing Rowan Williams about 22 years ago when I was a journalism student. And I was asking him about, the seemingly terminal decline of church attendance and institutional Christianity, at least in the UK and in much of the West. And one of the things I remember him saying was, well, I think that there might be a certain gift in the arrival of a generation who've grown up with little or no experience of institutional Christianity. And I suppose the way I see that, remembering his words then and seeing how it connects to the moment we're in now, is it's as though the deep wells that exist within this tradition are not cluttered up with childhood memories of Sunday school or worse experiences. And there is, as a result, a possibility of meeting it afresh, meeting it anew. And I realize as I say that I'm definitely speaking from this side of the Atlantic. Listening to Tim talk about the power of this kind of rather satanic form of fundamentalism that has such a grip on particularly white America. I realize that we're operating in quite different environments, him there and me here in Sweden and coming from the UK. So your mileage may vary depending on what part of the world you're in. But in this particular corner of the world, I think there's some truth in that observation that Rowan was seeing coming over the horizon. And I think we're further into that, and that's part of the conditions of what's going on. Another thing that's almost too obvious to labor the point, but there is a belated awareness of cultural appropriation, an awareness that at its worst, that kind of going out and seeking the wisdom in everyone else's traditions involves going to the same places that people who looked a lot like us went to, over the last 500 years to appropriate everything else. And no, that's not true to all of the encounters and all of the, things that happened as a result of people going out, seeking the wisdom in other people's traditions. But nonetheless, I think that is part of where the homeward turn comes from. And it also comes with a sense of, being sent back. It's there, I think, there's an edge of it in those two stories that I told, Stone Eagle on the Isle of Iona and the story from my friend in Canada, of, not just being allowed to disown our own ancestors and expect that that somehow allows us to atone for the legacies that we're still benefiting from, but actually, in some of the deeper encounters that I have been around between settler, colonial, and indigenous peoples, part of what's going on is being sent back to take responsibility for our ancestors, including for the traditions that they were carriers of. Then there's another sense in which I think we're in a moment where a lot of people are having an experience of, maybe we need to retrace our steps. And that has to do with the failure of the logics of modernity, the failure of the promises of progress, the sense that, arises in different forms for different people, but is quite widespread within the Western societies, that something went badly wrong somewhere back there. And it's like, if you're out for a walk in the woods and you realize that, no, we definitely took a wrong turning back there somewhere, it's not a foolish move to turn around and retrace your steps. And for some people, that is the kind of path that leads them back into taking seriously, engaging seriously with things that mattered to their grandparents or great-grandparents' generation, but that had seemed to be consigned to the dustbin of history, obsolete, old-fashioned, out of date. We don't need that stuff anymore. We've grown up, according to the rationalist logics of progress. When those logics no longer ring true, no longer hold the same promise, then the sheer strangeness of the place that led us to, the sheer contrast between the ways of inhabiting the world that have been taken for granted in the West in recent generations, and the plurality of ways of inhabiting the world that our ancestors and everyone else have been part of. That contrast no longer can be turned into a confident assertion of, well, that's because we've developed and everyone else is living in our past and they'll be here soon. It begins to be, in one way or another, more and more a question of, well, did we take a wrong turning somewhere? And with that, there's an awareness of the lack and the loss that is run through the fabric of the culture of those who are meant to be the winners, according to the story of progress, the story of modernity. And I think of an episode that Ed Gillespie and I did of our podcast, The Great Humbling. A couple of seasons ago, we did an episode called Get on Your Knees. It was about prayer, not coming specifically from a Christian perspective, just talking about prayer very generally as a cross-cultural phenomenon, and observing the weirdness of, I think this is how we put it. Has there ever been a culture that was so lacking in the literacy of blessing, that went through its days without those moments and those words for those moments of turning our attention to gratitude, or creating a vessel to hold sorrow and suffering? Has there ever been a culture that tried to get through life with so little skill in those things as the culture of late modernity in the West?